Hey, good afternoon. I hope you're having a great day. So, this week in the Torah portion, we read one of the most painful and hard to understand episodes in the Torah that all the commentaries discuss at length. And that's the story of Moses and Aaron being punished that they can't go into the Holy Land of Israel. Let's remember, Moses and Aaron, the greatest leaders, who took the Jewish people out of Egypt, brought them to the sea, split the sea for them, of course through God, brought them to Mount Sinai to get the Torah, nurtured them in the desert, all to bring them to the Holy Land of Israel. And then God doesn't allow them to go in. And the story is mysterious because God tells Moses Miriam had passed away. And God tells Moses the Jews are complaining there's no water. And God tells Moses, go to the rock and speak to the rock and tell the rock to give out water. Now, the rabbis tell us the reason why there was no water was because all the time that Miriam was alive, the Jewish people had the well of Miriam, which nurtured them and gave them sustenance and drink in honor of Miriam. But when Miriam passed away, there was no water. So God tells Moses to go and to speak to the rock. Moses goes, and the rabbis tell us he spoke to the rock, but the rock didn't give out water. He was speaking to the wrong rock. So then he hit the rock. And when he hit the rock, water came out. And God told him that since you didn't sanctify me by speaking to the rock, as I told you, you will not bring the Jewish people to the land of Israel. First of all, why such a harsh punishment? And what's the difference if he speaks to the rock or he hits the rock? And why would Moses have hit it if God told him to speak to it? The rabbis tell us that 38 years earlier, when the Jews had just come out of Egypt, they had the same issue with there being no water. And there God tells Moses to hit the rock. So then that's why Moses thought if it doesn't speak to, maybe God wants him to hit the rock. But why would God tell him to hit the rock and then 39 years later or 38 years later he tells him to speak to the rock? And the rabbis tell us something very profound. The rabbis tell us that when Moses took the Jewish people out of Egypt, they were a slave-minded people who had been in slavery and brutal confinement for 210 years, the worst oppression possible. And when Moses had brought them out, in order for Moses to mold them and to nurture them, he had to, so to speak, be forceful with them. He had to hit them in the sense of speak strongly and guide them with an iron fist in order to get them out of that slave mentality and to nurture them to be able to become a free nation. And that's why there God tells him to hit the rock. But 38 years later, it was a new generation. They had grown up in the desert. They had been nurtured by the manna, by the cloud of glory, by the well, by Moses and Aaron, by the ideas, the Torah that they were taught. They were a more refined nation. And at that point, they needed a different type of communication, a softer communication. But Moses, the leader that Moses was the leader that took the Jewish people out of Egypt. And therefore his way and his method was that of a strong-handed and pulling them through. And therefore Moses, so to speak in the metaphor, kept on hitting the Jewish people. He spoke strongly and forcefully. And that's why God told Moses that you're not going to go into the land of Israel. It wasn't a punishment. But sometimes a different generation needs a different leader and a different method in how they're dealt with. And that's why God tells Moses, you won't enter the land because you hit the rock and didn't speak to it. What he was telling him is that this is not a punishment. This generation needs a leader that will be gentler, that will speak to them differently, that will nurture them differently. And the thing is that that's really true in all of our lives and the settings we're in. Sometimes different people need different ways to be dealt with. And if you're going to speak strongly to someone that needs a soft, gentler touch, then you're going to push them away. You're not going to be the right person to lead them. And the message we learn from Moses and Aaron is when we look at our generation today and we look at our children, it's a new generation. And the methods we speak to them and the way we lead them and nurture them and guide them has to be in a gentle, in a soft, in a loving, in a kind way in order to lift them up and make them the proud Jews and leaders we want them to be. Have an awesome day.